This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today. I'm Richard Nta in Nairobi. Here's what's ahead. The United States says it can help Ukraine investigate a cyber attack on government websites. Australia detains world tennis number one Novak Djokovic again after his visa was canceled for a second time. And Malians take to the streets after the military junta calls for protests against sanctions. Once again, welcome to The World Today. Let's begin with the Djokovic visa saga. The world number one tennis player is in detention in Australia, and the country's immigration minister has canceled the unvaccinated player's visa for a second time, just days before the start of the Australian Open. Greg Navarro has the story.
If Novak Djokovic was hoping to find sympathy in Melbourne, the host city of the Australian Open and one of the most locked down cities in the world, he'd be disappointed.
Maybe everyone here is so sick of being under so many strict rules, they think everyone else should, well, you abide by them too. We've done the hard yards, maybe you can do it too.
He's an anti-vaxxer who doesn't have the nerve or constitution to come out and say he's an anti-vaxxer. I have no time for him at all.
Last Friday, Australia's immigration minister cancelled the Serbian tennis player's visa for a second time on health and good order grounds. Documents show he believed a high-profile person such as Djokovic could pose a risk to Australians by causing an increase in anti-vaccination sentiment. Djokovic's lawyers have asked for an emergency hearing before a federal judge to make their case for why he should remain. Legal analysts say the timing of the release of the government's long-awaited decision was in part a strategic move to give Djokovic's legal team as little time as possible to try to mount a defense and keep him in the country ahead of Monday's start to the Australian Open. The defending Australian Open men's champion originally applied for and received a medical exemption to the tournament because he had contracted COVID last month. All players and staff must be fully vaccinated to attend this year's Open.
Well, I think as long as the exemption is valid and they have valid reasons, I don't see a problem with that.
But Australia's government did have a problem with that, requiring all overseas visitors to be fully vaccinated. Djokovic's visa was cancelled when he arrived earlier this month, and he was detained for several hours.
Rules are rules, and there are no special cases.
The case went before a federal judge who overturned that cancellation, ruling that Djokovic didn't have enough time to respond. It now appears that Djokovic misled Australian authorities on his entry declaration relating to overseas travel in the prior 2 weeks, and he acknowledged that he took part in an interview with a French journalist while he was infected with COVID-19 last month.
It just seems like it's dragged on for quite a long time now, and yeah, not great for the tennis, not great for the Australian Open, not great for Novak.
If his lawyers are unsuccessful, Djokovic faces deportation and could be banned from returning to Australia for up to 3 years. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
On Friday, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić accused Canberra of persecuting the tennis star and the nation of Serbia, where residents have voiced support for Djokovic. Aljosa Milinkovic has more from Belgrade.
Serbian state-owned TV interrupted their usual programming on Friday to go to a live report from Australia following the decision of the immigration minister. The news to revoke Novak Djokovic's visa wasn't unexpected in Serbia. Local media had been speculating that the Australian government might revoke the visa for the world number one tennis player for days now. And many in Serbia believe this decision has nothing to do with Novak's alleged breaching of Australia's immigration rules, but it is politically motivated.
I don't like this at all. It's all about the politics, and Novak will suffer the most consequences.
It's because politics entered sports, but Djokovic is also to blame because he didn't take the vaccine.
There has to be some respect to him, to Novak Djokovic. He's the icon of Serbia, of the Balkans and Europe. This wouldn't happen if Nadal did the same. It's all because he's Serb.
close attention has been paid to the statements of Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Many here believe that Djokovic's case is being used to improve his political position ahead of the national elections. There's also a belief the Australian government is trying to refocus the public away from an unprecedented spike of new COVID cases to Djokovic's refusal to get a COVID vaccine. As lawyers for Djokovic weigh up his options, many in Serbia will be staying glued to the news outlets as they wait to see whether the country's sporting hero will be allowed to take part in the Australian Open next week. Aljoša Milenković, CGTN, Belgrade.
Let's turn our attention to the Ukraine tensions now. The United States and its allies have offered support to Ukraine as the investigation on a cyber attack that targeted the country continues. Ukrainian government websites were hacked with warnings to, quote, be afraid and expect the worst, close quote, as a massive cyber attack hit the country. It caused sites to go offline, including the one of the Defense Ministry. Ukrainian State Security Service claimed there were signs of Russian involvement in the hack. Moscow had no comments on this. The attack comes amid a buildup of troops on the Russian-Ukrainian border. A series of talks aimed at diffusing tensions have failed to achieve any breakthroughs.
You know, certainly Ukraine and many Western countries are waiting to see really what Russia's response may be. And of course, Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has promised a military response of some sort should some of Russia's key demands not be met. As you say, we're standing at a military training camp at the moment. Ukraine's army is a very different prospect from what it was even a few years ago. It's a country that's spending about 4% of its GDP on defence now, a standing army of 225,000 or more, 900,000 reservists. It has bolstered its defences, and of course it's had a lot of Western money, Western aid come in to support its military as well. But there are 100,000 plus Russian troops on the border with Ukraine at the moment. Russia has a standing army of 1 million and many more reservists. But what Ukraine, or one of the things that Ukraine is counting on as a deterrent, or perhaps as well to make a full Russian invasion of Ukraine very difficult, is a civil defence programme. And so what you're seeing behind me here is part of a much wider programme taking place right across Ukraine to train up civilians. There is polling to show that popularity and support for Russia over the last few years has dropped significantly, certainly in this part of Ukraine. And so there is an approach, this is part of it, of building up a civil resistance that, should a Russian invasion occur, might make life very difficult for Russian forces. Important to point out that Russian Vladimir Putin continues to maintain that Russia has no plans to invade Ukraine, but he is promising military technical measures of some sort. And training programs like this have been stepped up in recent months, and they are very much part of trying to deter and potentially resist any Russian incursion.
In other news, thousands of people protested in Mali on Friday in response to calls for demonstrations by the military junta over further sanctions imposed by the nation by ECOWAS. The West African bloc imposed the sanctions in response to delayed elections in Mali that had been previously set for February. The military, however, proposed staying in power for up to 5 years before staging the polls. The fresh sanctions have been supported by France, the United States, and the European Union. Despite the pressure, many in Mali have rallied behind the military junta. Colonel Assimi Goïta, who first took power in a coup in August 2020, has dubbed the sanctions as inhumane and extreme.
We have come for the cause of the country. Let everyone come out. Let all the Muslims come out to support the country.
As a Malian proverb says, when the tam-tam sounds and calls the sons of the country, we answer the call. That's why I'm here. Mali has called everyone today. All the children of Mali came out in response today, as our national anthem says.
The fresh sanctions include the withdrawal of ECOWAS ambassadors in Mali, the closure of land and air borders between ECOWAS countries and Mali, and the suspension of all transactions between ECOWAS member states and Mali. Sanctions by the Economic Community of West African States have drawn a strong response from Malian people.
As we have said, the Malian people do not deserve these sanctions. In no case should the people of Mali be sanctioned in this manner. These people have done nothing wrong, and I think those responsible for the chaos in Mali are well known. At the beginning, ECOWAS had taken targeted sanctions against the political authorities who do not want to take concrete actions that could bring us to the end of the transition.
ECOWAS is determined to stay the course and not lose face. This sub-regional organization wants to be credible, but is no longer credible. ECOWAS is no longer credible because we have seen that in some countries, presidents have made constitutional revisions to extend their mandate at the head of their country, and it has done nothing. This way of doing things is likely to prove that this institution is no longer credible. It is not an organization at the service of the people, but at the service of certain heads of state.
The office of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has apologized to the Queen after reports revealed 2 staff parties at Downing Street breaking COVID restrictions and the day before Prince Philip's funeral. Reports said Johnson's staff partied in Downing Street and his residence last April when mixing indoors was banned for people from different households. On top of that, it was a period of national mourning for the Queen's husband. The United Kingdom on Friday reported more than 99,000 new cases. It is a decline compared to the week before, and the country's health authorities said that there is now, quote, high confidence, close quote, that Omicron is relatively mild for most adults. The World Health Organization, however, has warned that more studies are still needed to prove it. Well, that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from the continent in Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
This is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tents here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Marawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Malians take to the streets after the military junta calls for protests against sanctions. Ethiopia prepares for national dialogue to resolve political differences. And 12 in custody in Burkina Faso over destabilization plot. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area launches a new cross-border payment system. And in sports, the finalists, 2019 finalists, Senegal draw 0-0 with rivals Guinea in their Group B Africa Cup of Nations encounter. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Great to have you along with us for this hour. We begin in West Africa, where thousands of people protested in Mali on Friday in response to calls for demonstrations by the military junta over further sanctions imposed on the nation by ECOWAS. The regional bloc imposed the sanctions in response to delayed elections in Mali that had been previously set for February. The military, however, proposed staying in power for up to 5 years before staging the polls. The fresh sanctions have been supported by France, the United States, and the European Union. Despite the pressure, many in Mali have rallied behind the military junta. Colonel Assimi Goïta, who first took power in a coup in August 2020, has dubbed the sanctions as inhumane and extreme.
We have come for the cause of the country. Let everyone come out. Let all the Muslims come out to support the country.
As a Malian proverb says, when the tam-tam sounds and calls the sons of the country, we answer the call. That's why I'm here. Mali has called everyone today. All the children of Mali came out in response today, as our national anthem says.
The United Nations is urging Mali's ruling junta to announce an election timetable amid anger over its decision to delay elections. UN Chief Antonio Gutierrez says this could improve relations between Mali and the international community, in particular the West African bloc, ECOWAS.
ECOWAS decision establishing that if Malian government presents an acceptable timeline and takes steps in that direction, then there will be gradual lifting of sanctions. And of course, I'm working with ECOWAS and the African Union to create conditions which can allow the government of Mali to adopt a reasonable and acceptable position to accelerate a transition which has already been underway for a long time.
The fresh sanctions include the withdrawal of all ECOWAS ambassadors in Mali, the closure of land and air borders between ECOWAS countries and Mali, and the suspension of all transactions between ECOWAS member states and Mali. All right, let's bring in Ovigwe Agwegu, policy analyst at Development Reimagined. He specializes in geopolitics with particular reference to Africa. Welcome to Africa Live. Thank you for taking time to speak to us. Let's talk about this in a little deeper. Huge support there for the military. Are Malians not worried about the impact the sanctions will have on them?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I would say they are worried. The concerns are there because when you hear sanctions, of course, it means the country will lose access to certain goods and services. However, you have to understand that the current military government has a lot of supporters that believe in leadership, and to a large extent, both the leadership and protesters on the street did expect or anticipate these sanctions because there's a script ECOWAS usually follows in response, to coup. So while the support is there, knowing fully well that the trust of leadership to be able to navigate past these sanctions, I see that's why you see a lot of supporters, on the street. But going forward, I think the military government should focus on how to get around these sanctions, because when these sanctions begin to bite, we might begin to see some of those, support being lost to the economic, and social pressures that the sanctions can cause.
All right, with what you said, the people anticipated this, the military anticipated this. Now, the military leaders are promising to put all measures in place to ensure Malians do not suffer. With the Malian leaders seemingly unwilling to cooperate with ECOWAS, what happens next for the country and the regions? Ovigwe?
Well, I think you have to understand that the ECOWAS is a 15-member bloc, and not all 15, have come out in support of the border closure. So you will recall that in September last year, there was a coup in Guinea as well. So following the announcement that of fresh sanctions to close borders, stop financial transactions with Mali, Guinea did announce that they will not be in support. And Mali being a landlocked country, that is an ECOWAS sanction is essentially an economic blockade. So what you then have is one country, Guinea, that borders Mali directly, still retaining its border access and border remains open with Mali. So that gives Mali some form of access to the sea, because Mali does have Guinea does have sea access. So to a large extent, I think I foresee the military government capitalizing on this opportunity to further cooperate with Guinea and see that as a way to provide goods in particular that would prevent any form of social unrest in the country. However, how they will move forward is they are in some form of dilemma. The Malian government has to act, or at least to show that the sanctions are effective in order to make military intervention unnecessary. So I think for them to do that, they would then have to make some concessions, in terms of their negotiation with ECOWAS. But it remains to be seen if they'll be able to do that, because ECOWAS in this sense now doesn't have much to lose. So they will have to find a way to get ECOWAS around the table on ways to see where both sides can meet each other midpoints.
All right. Well, there you have it. Thousands protest over fresh ECOWAS sanctions. ECOWAS imposes fresh restrictions over election delays. All right, Ovigwe Ogwegu, thank you for your insight and analysis. Let's turn our attention now to Ethiopia, where the country is preparing to stage a national dialogue. The process aims to resolve political differences, including over the ongoing civil war in the northern Tigray region. Ahead of the national dialogue, the government has released a number of political prisoners. As CGTN's Groom Chala reports, opposition leaders are already proposing a new national constitution.
Preparations are now underway by Ethiopian authorities to stage the much anticipated all-inclusive national dialogue. Addis Ababa believes this would be a forum that can deliver key answers to sticking political questions and differences of the country.
We have worked alongside other stakeholders for the upcoming all-inclusive national dialogue to be a story of success. We expect this dialogue to guarantee long-lasting peace, and all stakeholders have deliberated on which kinds of decisive political measures should be taken. These discussions, intended to successfully hold the national dialogue, took ample time and were held between the parties and the government.
In preparation for the talks, Ethiopia has released dozens of well-known political prisoners. High-profile names include Jawar Mohammed and Iskender Nega. In the latest press conference since his release from prison, Iskender said his party will demand a change of the current Ethiopian constitution.
The main agenda we'll present in the national dialogue is a change of the existing constitution of the country. One cannot make any dictator regime into a democratic one through any reforms. There is no such global experience. Those nations which transformed from dictatorship to democracy have devised a new constitution.
Addis Ababa promises the national dialogue will be democratic and transparent.
Based on its last experience, the government is building strong institutions, and these institutions are working freely, basing themselves on the national interest of the people.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has promised a national dialogue to bring all political stakeholders together to discuss grievances which include regional border issues, the question of identity, constitutional reforms and amendments, among other issues. Grumtala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
The U.S. State Department has warned Somali leaders against further delays to the indirect parliamentary elections and threatened to impose targeted sanctions, including visa restrictions. The ongoing elections have been repeatedly delayed after it failed to conclude on schedule. Mohammed Kahia has the details from the capital, Mogadishu.
The U.S. has asked Somali leaders to adhere to new election timeline and conclude the parliamentary elections by 25th February. The process was delayed several times before, following disagreements among Somali leaders. Analysts say Washington is impatient with the delay of Somali election process that has created security tensions in the country.
One could read the American statement as a leverage to pressure Somali politicians to expedite elections, and Americans will not tolerate any delays of Somali elections. And a significant number of Somali politicians have a Western passport or citizenships, and any visa restrictions will have adverse impact on them.
Analysts also link the tone used by the State Department to changes at the White House.
It's the change of administration in the U.S., in Washington, in which Joe Biden wants to see elections taking place in Africa. He wants to counter the rise of populism in the Horn and in the channel of the continent. So he wants to assert the American influence in Somalia.
Member of Parliament say Washington must respect international relation norms, while its recommendations to expedite elections are welcomed.
Somalia is an independent state with its own sovereign land, air and water boundaries that need to be respected as per the United Nations Charter and the UN Security Council treaties. Therefore, all governments have the right of non-interference in its domestic affairs.
The ongoing Somalia's parliamentary elections are expected to conclude towards end of February, before the schedule of the crucial presidential elections is released. Mohamed Kahir, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Well, Gabon scored a late goal against Ghana to draw their Africa Cup of Nations Group C match 1-1. The results puts Gabon missing captain Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang with heart lesions on the verge of the last 16. Now, for the latest on the ongoing tournament, we are joined by Nta, head of the Sports Cameroon Radio. He is joining us via Zoom from Yaoundé. Welcome to Africa Live. Let me begin by asking you, it's been a very eventful week for the African Championships, from referee controversy to COVID-19, and quite some interesting results. Can you give us an update on this?
Well, I mean, like you do well to mention, it's been a really, really fascinating tournament this far. Let me start with the refereeing controversy, because that's what's been grabbing the headlines. And it was a game between Tunisia and Mali. Mali won that game 1-0, but obviously it was Gianni Sikazwe, the Zambian referee, who ended up being the talk of the day. He actually blew his whistle to conclude the game twice, first at the 85th minute, and then when he realized his mistake, he brought back the players onto the pitch and then blasted his whistle at the 89th minute. And the Tunisian bench obviously went furious. They were irate, they were apoplectic. And at the end of that game, the Tunisian coach really had some tough words. But reports reaching us is that referee Gianni Sikazwe suffered a heat stroke during that game. Remember that it was an early kickoff at 2 p.m. in Limben, the southwest region. Usually around this period of the time, we have very high temperatures, between 28 to 29 at times. We pick up to 32 degrees, so it wasn't very easy for him or the players. But we've had reports that referee Gianni Sikazwe is getting better, that he's in fine fettle. Obviously not the sort of news you want coming out of the Africa Cup of Nations, a tournament that has got a massive following. But apart from the refereeing controversies, and like you did well to mention, we had some really, really exciting results. And I think the most exciting of all was probably the draw that Sierra Leone had with Algeria. I remember the Leone Stars coming into this tournament were really underrated. A lot of people thought, obviously, that it will be a mauling at the hands of the defending champions Algeria, who are star-studded. But it was incredible, the performance that they put up at the Djokovic Stadium, tying down Algeria to a goalless draw. And at the end of that game, the Sierra Leone goalkeeper spoke of his happiness, the fact that he's playing in his country and that they're able to get a point against the defending champions. But it was also, and this was a really, really palpitating fixture, Nigeria's 1-0 victory over Egypt. A really beautiful game by all standards, absolutely incredible. And then we had the cracker last night between Gabon and Ghana that ended in really the most controversial circumstances. Gabon got the equalizer in really very doubtful circumstances, and obviously the Ghanaian bench wasn't very happy with that at the end of the game. Ghana's coach and even their captain, Andre Ayew, said they felt that they had been cheated by the reaction of the Ghanaian players. For viewers who didn't watch that game, Gabon's equalizer came about because there was a foul on a Ghanaian player. The Ghanaians had possession. They put the ball out, and when play resumed, they expected the Gabonese players to return the ball to them, but no. The Gabonese players built up on that, and the Panthers got their equalizer late into the game, and so that leaves Ghana with just one option: beat Comoros in their final game to be able to sail through. But fortunately, the jinx of just one goal being scored per game was broken a few days ago by the host Cameroon after they thrashed Ethiopia 4-1, with Vensa Abubakar upping his tally to 4. And courtesy of his performances that day, he's the top scorer in the tournament with 4 goals. And hopefully we'll see a lot more. But it's been really exciting tournament, great performances, and really great upsets.
All right, Nta, and now, so we have so many questions but so little time. We have to leave it here for now. Thank you so much for that update and report. Much appreciated. Time now for a short break. You're watching Africa Live. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news stories. Here's what's ahead. 12 in custody in Burkina Faso over destabilization plot. And South Africa Heal Authority warns of approaching 5th coronavirus wave.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Thanks for staying with us. To Burkina Faso now, where 12 people, including a senior army officer, are in custody over a plot to destabilize institutions. According to Armed Forces Minister Amy Barthelemy Sempore, the 12 are among 15 people arrested since Monday after the plot was uncovered. Those arrested include 2 officers, 7 non-commissioned officers, a senior officer, and 5 civilians. Of these, according to Sempore, 2 civilians and a soldier have been released after giving preliminary testimony, leaving 12 in preventive detention. Sempore said the arrests were ordered by prosecutors at a military tribunal in the capital, Ouagadougou. The West African country has a long history of coups. It's currently battling a militant insurgency that swept in from neighboring Mali in 2015.
The Ministry of the Armed Forces and Veterans presented an oral communication to the Council of Ministers to report on the referral to the Public Prosecutor's Office of the Ouagadougou Military Court, which led to the arrest of military personnel and civilians for allegedly attempting to destabilize the institutions of the state. This legal action, which was decided by the military prosecutor, follows report by a soldier who was allegedly contacted by a group of individuals to join the group in order to carry out destabilization actions against the institutions.
South Africans have been warned to brace themselves for a fifth COVID-19 wave. The National Department of Health and health experts announced in a virtual press briefing on Friday that even though it's unclear when the new wave is likely to hit, it is definitely coming. South Africa is currently dealing with the fourth wave of the pandemic driven by the Omicron variant. CGTN's Yulisa Njamela has more.
South Africa's economic hub, the Gauteng province, has officially exited the fourth wave of COVID-19 infections. This is while the country's 8 other provinces have reached their peaks of the same wave. That's according to the National Health Department and a number of health experts here. But they warn that that is no reason to celebrate yet, as the Omicron variant, which has been driving the fourth wave, is still with us.
Omicron is not gone, it's here. It's only that, fortunately, as we have said, its severity has been manageable. So at this stage, as to when it will be completely gone, as already mentioned, we really don't know.
South Africans have now been cautioned about the impending fifth wave. Health experts say while they cannot predict the timing and the severity of the next wave, they're quite certain that it will not be as severe as the first 3 waves.
We're fairly sure there will probably be a fifth wave. I think as to the timing, as we've seen with the other waves, I think very difficult to predict an exact timing. But as with all the other waves, I think there's multiple factors which do play in. And as we've seen with all previous waves, it has been driven by a new variant.
I think in terms of the fifth wave, we have to see what the winter months will bring. We have to, this year will teach us whether we are moving towards a more endemic nature of SARS-CoV-2. But as long as we have ongoing transmission, there's a possibility of viral evolution. And so it's going to be critical for us to continue the excellent surveillance that we do and try and make sure we can pick up any variants that may cause a next wave.
It was also revealed in this virtual media briefing that only 40% of South Africa's adult population has been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. The government's target for vaccination is at least 70%. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
The health department in Tunisia announced that the North African country has witnessed the emergence of COVID-19 outbreaks in schools as a result of the high spread of the new Omicron variant, coupled with low vaccination rates among children. More than 13,000 teachers are still unvaccinated in Tunisia. Adnan Chouachi reports.
Teachers' unions in Tunisia have called for the temporary suspension of classes at schools across the country to help reduce the spread of coronavirus in educational institutions. Authorities closed several primary and secondary schools to break the chain of infection.
The so-called solution of the scientific committee is not practical. It's impossible to apply preventive measures and social distancing while the classrooms are overcrowded with students. The health protocol does not exist in educational institutions. Face masks, hand sanitizers, and disinfection operations are not available, while the majority of students are not vaccinated.
The scientific committee to combat the coronavirus recommended keeping schools open. The COVID-19 task force did not suggest a return to the rotational attendance system.
The rotational attendance system is not efficient to stop infections. It's useless to study one day and to stay at home for the next day. We recommend closing any class where 3 students test positive and shutting down the whole school when there are positive cases in 3 classes. Following health protocols and vaccinating all school staff is the best solution.
Many university students believe that campuses should remain open, while others are calling for shutting down all Tunisian universities.
All students are wearing face masks in class. Most of us are vaccinated and social distancing is respected. Closing the campuses is useless.
Unlike secondary and primary schools, universities are equipped to study online. Shutting down campuses for 1 or 2 weeks will not affect us because we can study at home. It is better than spreading infections in public transport. We can later return when everyone is vaccinated.
The Education Ministry revealed that no serious cases have been recorded among children affected by Omicron. The rate of vaccination among children aged between 12 and 15 years is still low in Tunisia. The health department in Tunisia announced that with the emergence of the Omicron variant, the COVID-19 task force decided to reduce the 7-day quarantine period. An infected student can now return to school after a 5-day quarantine if their test is negative. Adnan Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
We have our business segment up next. Don't go away. Here's what's ahead. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area launches a new cross-border payment system. Ghana's economy nears its performance before the coronavirus pandemic.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to Africa Live. We appreciate your company. Africa's new cross-border payment system was launched in Ghana's capital, Accra, on Thursday. The Pan-African Payments and Settlement System will facilitate intra-regional trade and payments by enabling the real-time transfer of funds from one African country to another. Traders have until now had to settle payments via U.S. and European banks. Its developer, the African Export-Import Bank, says the new system is expected to save the continent about $5 billion in offshore clearance and transaction costs. The system has already been piloted in the West African Monetary Zone, which includes Nigeria. It is also one of the key building blocks for the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is expected to be fully operational in 2030. The African Free Trade Area could become the world's biggest free trade zone area with a potential market of 1.2 billion people and a combined GDP of 2.5 trillion. And in Kenya, the government has been accused of defaulting on millions of dollars in fuel subsidy payments. The debt is sparking quite disquiet among oil marketing companies. Shareholders and stakeholders in the sector say the government has not paid a single cent for the December-January review, which amounts to about $70 million. This is in addition to other pending payments for November last year. The delays are said to be causing cash flow problems for marketers, especially independent firms that tap bank loans to pay for the fuel and food distribution costs. The Oil Marketers Association of Kenya now say that they want the government to pay interest on delayed funds in what will come with another cost to taxpayers. Tanzania launched on Friday a project to enhance civil aviation safety oversight systems. The $1 million project financed by China aims to build capacity in aircraft operations and to safely accommodate air traffic growth. The grant was provided by the Chinese government through its South-South Cooperation Assistance Fund. The project will be implemented for 1 year by the International Civil Aviation Organization. The launch ceremony was held on Friday in the commercial capital, Dar es Salaam.
The project will consist, number one, providing trainings to TCAA and Accident Investigation Bureau personnel, providing on-job training to TCAA and Accident Investigation Bureau staff in operations, airports, and air navigation services. Procuring equipment, softwares, tools that are necessary and required for both TCAA and Accident Investigation Bureau.
The comprehensive strength
of China's civil aviation industry is at the forefront of the world. And now we are striving to achieve high-quality development. The Tanzanian government also pays high attention to the development of civil aviation industry. The Chinese side is willing to support Tanzania in developing its civil aviation industry and promoting its connectivity with other African countries as well as the world, and China included.
South Africa's Energy Minister Richard Nta has told Parliament that Shell's plan for seismic testing on the country's wild coast received all necessary environmental approvals. The Energy Minister also said no shortcuts had been made in the process. On December the 28th, a South African High Court blocked Royal Dutch Shell from conducting seismic testing offshore of the wild coast. This is the latest ruling in a case brought by environmental groups and residents against Shell. Environmentalists protested against Shell's plans for seismic blasting, saying its underwater acoustics are harmful to marine animals, especially migrating whales. Shell says its planned exploration has all the needed regulatory approval, and it will significantly contribute to energy security if resources are found. South Africa is a net importer of petroleum products. The government is eager to source feedstock for the state-run Mossel Bay gas-to-liquid refinery, but environmentalists are pressuring oil companies to stop prospecting for oil anywhere. Ghana's economy is inching closer to pre-pandemic levels after taking a hit from the coronavirus. The International Monetary Fund is forecasting the West African country's economy will expand by 6.2% this year. But as Ghana's economy tries to rebound, traders say the high cost of goods and services is taking a toll on many businesses. CGTN's Nabil Akman Rafai reports from Accra.
The new year has started on a slow note for Rosina Edujemfi. She sells groceries at this market in Accra and says people are not coming to buy food.
Many people have used their money to celebrate Christmas, and because the groceries are now very expensive, consumers are not coming to the market.
Like Rosina, other traders in this market say business is off to a poor start.
Most of the things I sell here are imported. Since last year, the cedi has been depreciating against the US dollar, so it's now more expensive to import food products.
Despite these concerns, the government says Ghana's economy looks positive this year. The IMF has projected the economy to expand by 6.2%. Still, traders are concerned about the cost of goods and services shooting up this year. Last year, the hikes in fuel prices linked to changes in global markets fed through to inflation in other sectors of Ghana's economy. The cost of transporting food to the market went up, and traders had to pass the extra cost to consumers. Economists said as the global economy recovers from the pandemic, Ghana's economy is also likely to gain.
Once you hear commodity price going up, then you know that economies like Ghana, which is commodity driven, obviously we stand to gain, because we deal in a lot of commodities like gold, like cocoa and all of that. So once the price of these products are going up in the global market, obviously you would expect that we're going to be earning some foreign exchange, and that in itself will increase or boost the growth that we expect to have.
Like many traders in this market, Rosina Edujemfi wants the projected economic growth to translate into the cost of goods and services going down. She believes it will help many businesses recover quickly from the shocks by the pandemic. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And we are not done just yet. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Stay tuned. Here's what's coming up. In sports, 2019 finalists Senegal draw 0-0 with rivals Guinea in their Group B Africa Cup of Nations encounter.